Alright, now before we get into the army comps, I want to warn you guys ahead of time that this is going to run quite long. This is a brand new faction, there's a lot of content to cover, so I want to get into as much of it as humanly possible. And for those of you that want to skip this portion of the battle, I'm going to put some timestamps for you down in the description, and you can just get right into the replay if that's what you choose to do. But I recommend that you don't. There's a lot of cool stuff here, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of like gameplay tips on how you can play Lindon effectively, because they do have their own unique playstyle. But in any case, let's get into it. The first Lindon Army we're looking at today is the Forces of Sin of the Dark Cloud, one of the creators of the mod and the creator of this faction pretty well from the ground up. He has got some Mythlon Marines who are, now I want to say this right now, not Mythlon, Lindon is a hybrid faction. There's a lot of units that can perform a dual role, and this is the perfect example of them. The Lindon Marines are armed with, I believe, about 4 or so javelins. They do a lot of damage, but they've also got a sword that they can pull out as well, so they can be used as very, very able infantry, and indeed they should be. And behind them we have a unit of Mythlon pikemen. This is the second tier of their pike units, I believe, the second and I think highest tier. Lindon really relies, how would I put this? They don't have a ton of elite picks, and they rely on their roster supporting each other in order to be effective. So for example, a pike unit like this, like the Mythlon pikemen, they are quite lightly armored, and it's very easy to kill them with arrows, even with like regular kind of arrows. Not like, yeah, I guess you could call them militia tier. Militia tier arrows will do a number on these guys. So what I recommend that you do is take a unit of, say, the Mythlon Marines or one of the infantry units that we're going to get into in a little bit, and you mix them in here. Make sure that they're in front of your pike so that they can actually block the arrows for them. And you're going to want to have both of them sitting in defensive stance so that they can massacre anything that comes within range. The shielded units will block for the pikes, greatly increasing their longevity, and the pikes will defend them with their very long spears. It is very, very deadly, and it can stand up to just about anything. The only real downside to Lindon as a faction, pretty well as a whole, is that units with large mass can cause them a lot of problems. They can break up those formations. But that's a problem for basically anybody that relies on their formation, but for the Lindon elves in particular, because they have a little bit lower mass than most of the other factions in the game. But in any case, the Mythlon pikemen, very, very deadly, and I think they've got like 10 or 11 damage and like 12 defense, which is a lot, given the new stats. The new kind of stat ratios in 0.95. In behind them, we have a unit of the Harlindon Guard. These are another hybrid unit. They've got those spears, and they have a shield as well that they use when combat has been joined. And they've got some pretty serious arrow damage. This is the mid-tier archer unit for Lindon, and I find that you're going to rely on these guys pretty heavily in a lot of scenarios. They're quite cost effective, and damn, woe betide any cavalry that thinks that they can just run these guys over, because they are able spearmen. So once they run out of ammunition, which is going to happen a little bit more slowly for the elves than for other factions, but ammo generally has gone down, so these guys will eventually run out of ammo, and you'll be able to use them as support for your main line of sword infantry and pike infantry. I think this is still some of the Dark Cloud's army, yeah. So let's move on over here. We got some more Mythlon Marines, another front line of the Mythlon pikemen, and over here we have the Blade Masters of Loon. Now this is the, like, I would say that they're uber tier. They're the uber tier sword unit for the Elves of Lindon, and they are very, very deadly. But as you've noticed, there's not a lot of them. This is on huge unit size. So this is about as big as that unit is going to get. And now that is one thing you want to note about elites pretty well generally in 0.95. You're going to need to support them. they are not killing machines basically on their own. They can be overwhelmed even by chaff infantry. So it's going to be very much this kind of paradigm shift away from uber tier units that can just carve their way through meaningless hordes of chaff infantry. You're going to have to support your elites, or you will lose them, and you will lose all of the money that you invested into them. So it feels very much more, I would say, kind of how you would expect a battle to go in real life. Like, even the most highly trained infantrymen can be felled by an arrow or by a peasant with a pitchfork, or whatever happens, because there's a lot of like randomness in battle and stuff like that. So you're going to want to support your elites, mix them in with your pikes and your shielded infantry, and you will do very well. In behind them, we have a ranger unit and the only high-tier archer unit that is available to Lindon. These are the Wardens of Carib Erin, and they are seriously sexy. And they're actually going to be getting some custom animations for their, that is, I think it's like them and the Hashari. Pardon me, getting a bit of a cold again. It's them and the Hashari that share these animations, and they're going to be really cool. I haven't had a chance to see them yet, so I can't tell you any more in that regard, but I do know that they are in the works. But in any case, the Wardens of Carib Erin, you can only take one of them without getting a significant price increase. And yeah, they are seriously deadly ranger units. They've got dual swords in combat, and they just generally kick a lot of ass. They're quite lightly armored, however, even more so than the rest of the Lindon roster, so it's very easy for these guys to get shot down by militia archers, so you need to be careful with them. They do have some serious range on them, and they can hide anywhere, so they've got a couple of defenses going for them in that regard. You're just going to have to be careful with the way that you deploy them, and they can do very well for themselves. All along the line, you can see some more Mithlond pikemen from Sin of the Dark Cloud. I think that pretty well does it for his army, so let's move on to the cavalry contingent that we have hidden over here in the woods. Let's see. Yeah, we've got some Wardens of Harlindon here. Another hybrid unit. These guys are lancers. They don't have shields, however, unlike some of the other units in the Lindon roster, but they do have bows, and I think they've got like 8 bow damage. They can do some serious work from range. And horse archers in this, because they have the lower numbers, they tend to have, I believe the general rule is twice as much ammunition as foot archers, which is a significant amount. So your horse archers will be able to function as skirmish units pretty well throughout the whole game. That being said, I know it double the foot ammunition sounds like a lot. I have noticed that they've run out of ammunition really quickly, and that's because they fire very fast. So they won't be firing for 10,000 years like, say, to use a famous example, a crossbow unit with 50 in them that has basically full ammo will basically fire for like 3 hours straight. No, these guys will run out really quickly, so yeah, you need to be aware of your ammo conservation, I suppose. Sin of the Dark Cloud has some more units back here. He's got a lot of cavalry. He's very much the cavalry-focused player in this. And over here we have some of the Mithlond Lancers. And these are Javcav that are also a Lancer unit, so another hybrid unit like that from Lindon. They're sexy. I like them. They can do a ton of work. They feel really balanced. If you leave them in combat for a long time, they will die. They will die pretty damn fast, actually. So you're always going to want to keep these guys moving. But those javelins that they bring, they've got about 4 or so 8 damage javelins, and they can be used to soften up much stronger opponents that the Mithlond Lancers otherwise would not be able to take on in a straight fight. So wargs, for example, these guys are great at hunting wargs, shaving off some of that HP, and using their speed to surround and isolate enemy cavalry units. So as a whole, I think that they're pretty damn sexy. And now I just want to make a general point about the Lindon roster. Now what you've noticed is that they are not very bow heavy, as you'd expect many of the elven factions to be. They've only got about 3 bow units, 1 for each tier. And well, no, they've got 4 bow units because they have the Harlindon Wardens as well. But you're not going to be relying solely on your archers. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, you're going to need a combined arms approach. So what I find works really well is Mithlond cavalry on the flanks, or Mithlond lancers rather, on the flanks to harass and to zone out enemy cavalry, and then using a strong front line composed of multiple units stacked on top of each other to hold long enough for your cavalry and your archer corps and your javelins to really do the work that they need to. And I find that their front line, when well supported, it will hold very, very well. Though, as I mentioned earlier, there are some weaknesses to Lindon as a faction, but that's an intentional design kind of quirk, I guess, on the part of Sin of the Dark Cloud. But in any case, he's got 4 units of Mithlond Lancers, and I think, yes indeed, he's got 1 unit of Mithlond Chariots. This is one of 2 chariot units in the game. They're quite fragile. They have 4 HP, which is very, very weird. 4.95. Most units don't have HP, but trust me, they need it. They do still die quite quickly once they're locked in melee. That being said, you're going to see it in this battle. When they are on the charge, they just mow through things. It is pretty incredible. So it's a very much a trade-off. They're a glass cannon, but before you throw them in, they do have some javelin ammunition, which I suggest that you take advantage of because their javelins can really hurt. So there's a lot of skirmish here, and not like super powerhouse infantry, but infantry that does well when it supports each other. So I have to say that Lindon as a whole feels really, really satisfying to play. If you micro well and you're a skilled player with these elves, they are very, very strong. All right, so let's move on to my forces over here, and I'm going to be commanding the right wing of the Lindon Army, and I have brought, I believe, 2 units of the Harlingen Guard for myself. I've got a unit of Lindon Marines. This is the lower tier javelin unit. It's kind of the counterpart to the Mithlond Marines. I think that's what they're called, Mithlond Marines. Yes, indeed. Except that these guys are not armed with swords. These ones are armed with spears. So again, a nice support unit that when you mix in with your phalanxes can be really, really deadly. Now, a note on the javelin units in particular. I mentioned this earlier, but mixing them in with the pikes, it is so sexy because you have this little mid to close range, like killing powerhouse, basically, where anything that gets close to the pikes, like shield infantry, like the Blackwatch Legion, or things that can normally kind of push through the pikes on their own, they're going to find themselves face to face against some deadly javelin volleys. So it really kind of makes up for the weakness of the Lindon faction in that regard. That being said, these guys are quite cost efficient, so I would usually bring 1 or 2 of them. If I was going for like a lower tier kind of numbers army, I would definitely bring 2 of the Lindon Marines. And I find that because they're spearmen, they can actually operate a little bit farther afield than most javelin units would. Now, that being said, you don't want to just like throw them away, you know, get them well away from the phalanx where they can't be supported by archers or cavalry or anything else like that. But you don't have to babysit them as much, basically, because they have the shields, so they can, you know, block incoming arrow fire, and they've got the spears, so they can also ward off incoming cavalry. So as a hybrid unit, I find them to be extremely efficient and very, how would I say that? Self-sufficient, I think is the word I want. I've also got some of the Mithlond Pikemen of my own. I've got a couple units of Mithlond Marines, and where are they? I know I've got some Lindon Archers hanging out in here somewhere, like the lower tier ones. So we'll get to the Bladesmen in a minute. Ah, yes, here they are. The lower tier Lindon Archers, very cost effective. I think they've got about 7 missile damage, and they cost, I believe, 750 to bring. Now, the Lindon Elves are quite expensive, much more expensive than other units, and Archers in general have gone up significantly in price. So skirmishers are basically across the board are a lot more expensive. So I think you're going to find yourself fielding a lot infantry heavier armies than you would, like, say, skirmish heavy armies and things like that. Unless you're playing a certain faction, like the Woodland Realm, for example, you're going to have a lot of archers. But in any case, that's off topic. I digress. The Lindon Archers, quite cost effective. I usually bring... Actually, I think these are the archers that I'm most inclined to bring. They don't have spears or shields like the Harlingen Guard do, so you need to babysit them a little bit more, and they're not as well armored as the Harlingen Guard. So they can be shot down quite easily. That being said, they are elves, and they have the accuracy of elves that we've all come to know and love, I guess, or despise. I don't know. Depends on who you're talking to. But yes, very cost effective for what they are. Now we can move on to some of the higher tier units. We've got the Mithlond Bladesmen. These guys are basically your Eldarinway swordsmen, but they've got a little bit less armor. They've got high melee defense, I believe, and really high attack. But again, these are a unit that needs to be supported and work quite well in a support role for phalanxes and things like that, alongside units like, say, this one right here, which is the Sword and Board Bread and Butter unit of Lindon, the Warriors of Harlon. They only cost about 600 or so to bring, and they are very good for what they are. I think they've got like 10 attack, 21 defense, and reasonable enough numbers, 120 or so in the unit. They can be quite fearsome, and I find that these are the units that I bring most often, alongside a unit like, say, I know I've got some of the lower tier pikes in here somewhere. Ah, yes, the Lindon Pikemen. the bog standard Lindon pikemen. I find that Harlindon Guard mixed in with these pikemen will keep them alive in the face of an arrow shower, for example. Much better than these guys would be on their own. And together they make it's just an efficient line that is hard to break without taking a lot of casualties on the part of your enemy. So if you mix in those two lower tier units together, they will more than pay for themselves. I think that's just about it for my army, although I believe I have a cavalry unit as well. This is the Uber tier cavalry unit for Lindon. These are the Horse Lords of Loon. And they are, I think they're like a melee cav lancer hybrid, although I believe that they lack shields. Now they're pretty decent on the charge, and they have this big it looks two-handed, it's gigantic. They have this large curved sword on their back that they can use once they get into melee. And it's one thing to note that Lancer cavalry generally has a malice against other cavalry, for example, and a melee defense penalty. And I don't believe that the Horse Lords of Loon suffer from these particular drawbacks. So they're very expensive, and I think they cost like 1,300 or something like that to bring. But if you're careful with them, they can do a serious amount of damage. That being said, they are a little bit too expensive for my taste, so I don't usually include them in my army comps. And I think that basically does it for my army, so let's go ahead and move on to the third and final Lindon force, this one being commanded by Rules 1. He's got some warriors of Harland, he's got his own Lindon archers, a lot of Harlindon Guard as well, so a ton of spear and support units. Look at this, like multi-layered defense. This is how you want to do it as Lindon. And back here we got some more Mithlon pikemen, and supporting them, a couple units of the Mithlon Marines, another unit of Wardens of Care of Erin, some Horse Lords of Loon, we just saw those guys a moment ago, Mithlon Lancers of his own, a couple units of them, and he's also got his own chariot. I think that's basically it. He's got a final line of Bladesmen and Blade Master. He's got a lot of Bladesmen, actually, which are very deadly. And I think that basically does it for the Lindon forces. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at what Gundabad is bringing to the battle today. And I think you guys are going to be pretty excited about this, because there are some new takes on old favorites and some new units as well. So without any further ado, let's go see what Team Red is bringing to the battle. Alright, so the first Gundabad army we're going to look at today is the Forces of WK, one of the developers of the mod, who is in charge, I think, predominantly of the creation of maps. And we'll be seeing some of his creations a little bit closer to release date. I think there's going to be a lot of promotional videos coming out on the Age Reforged channel, for example, so you're going to get to see some of the new cities and things like that he's been working on. But anyway, shameless self-promotion aside, he's got a large number of orc fellers, actually a ton of orc fellers. Most of his front line is composed of this very cheap shock chaff unit, and behind them he's got the Orc Marauders. Now, a note on these guys: they are stronger in this battle than I think what they're supposed to be. I actually did the stats for Gundabad, and I made a mistake by giving these guys AP. So they're not supposed to have AP, so they're going to be a little bit more deadly than what they otherwise would be, as apparently AP also works in melee against shield bonuses. So yeah, bear that in mind when you watch this video, that the Orcs of Gundabad are a little bit stronger than what they are going to be when all things are said and done. But yeah, a ton of Orc Marauders as well. Just look at the scale of this army. It's mostly chaff. Now, in behind them we have the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, who I'm sure you guys are well familiar with at this point, but they have a new look. It's this kind of rusted chain and plate mail look, which I personally prefer the jet black one, but honestly this one doesn't look bad either, and it's definitely makes these guys, I don't know, they seem more orcish and a little bit less professional, which I think makes more sense with the theme of Gundabad, that being a lot of like crazy berserker units that just run forward, supported by some fairly high tier elites. Over here we have the Guardians of Carn-Dûm, again with their new texture update. Now this is cool. Check that out. This is the Witch Realm Blackguard, who I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with. And this is their new upgraded look. I think this is an armor upgrade, or I don't know if this is replacing the model entirely, but if you guys are still attached to the old Blackguard model, it does exist in the form of the mounted Witch Realm Inquisitors, I think that's what they're called. Yes, indeed. So you get a lot of flavor in terms of the looks for Gundabad now, which I think is really cool. Now over here, bear in mind this is a test build. This is not even the final product. So we do have a Silver Surfer here, but this is the new Trollman Officer, who's going to look, well, you can kind of figure out what he's going to look like. He looks like the Olokai who dueled Aragorn at the Black Gate, if you guys have seen Return of the King. And yeah, it's going to be the new Troll Officer unit. Let's see. I think that's it for his army, although he may have... No, he doesn't have any ranged units. So let's move on to the second Gundabad Army, this one being commanded by Carindol, another one of the developers. Again, a lot of Orc Fellers, a lot of Orc Marauders and things like that. I think in behind them has got the Orc Halberdiers, who are quite formidable in this. They have high attack, but quite low defense, so it's very fitting for the Gundabad theme. I don't remember exactly how much they have. I think it's like 8 damage or something like that. More Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, some Hammer Guard and things like that. Another unit of the Witch Realm Blackguard, and of course we have the Pikemen, who are updated with the new texture update. Now I want to draw your attention to the Snow Trolls, because I love the Snow Trolls, and I think that you guys are going to like them too. They've got about average armor, a little bit higher than normal melee defense. They have like 1 extra melee defense, but they have a shield, and the shield value is actually accounted for, and I don't know if it was previously, but they are the only troll unit that is able to stand up a little bit better to arrow fire from the front. And yeah, all around they've just got really really nice stats for what they cost. So if you're looking for a cost-efficient troll pick that's going to be actually quite strong, then I recommend that you go with the Snow Trolls. They don't have as high HP values and armor values as, say, the Trolls of Gundabad or the Olokai, for example, but I think that Snow Trolls are going to be people's go-to from now on. Mix them in maybe with some of the Mountain Trolls and stuff like that, just for the extra numbers, as a force used for smashing apart battle lines. So yeah, you're going to see a lot from the Snow Trolls in the future. That's my prediction. I'm calling it right now. Over here we have the Warg Skirmishers, who you guys are all familiar with. We're only going to take a look at them briefly because I want to look at the new Warg model, which is I kind of like it more than I like the big mutated hyena look that they have in the Peter Jackson films. This is a little bit more closely related to the Hobbit Wargs, for example. And all in all, I kind of prefer this new look rather over the old one. Now, if we move on over here, we have another Gundabad force commanded by Von Mountain. Again, very similar army composition. A lot of Orc Fellers in the front, a lot of Orc Marauders. Behind them, they're supported by some Witch Realm units. And finally got some Hammer Guard in the back here, who again have that new look that all the Gundabad elites are going to be taking. And the Warg Skirmishers, more Blackguard. It's all pretty standard stuff. And again, another army over here under Fluffy Duck. Although I should mention that there's a couple Goblin Trackers in 2 of these armies. I believe Fluffy Duck and Carindol's army have Goblin Trackers. And when I find them, I'll give you guys a note about them, because I do want to talk about them briefly. But yeah, more Orc Skirmishers, Gundabad Guards, who do not have HP and they do not have AP, but they are a really strong unit for pushing, and they are quite well armored, and those big shields allow them to stand up to arrow fire and basically anything really well from the front. So they're an excellent holding force and really good for pushing. Let's see here. Yeah, more Guardians of Karn Doom. Now this is important. The Blackwatch Legion, previously a unit associated with the Misty Mountains, have been given to Gundabad. And don't worry too much about the Misty Mountains. When we do a faction spotlight on them, then I'll be able to go into a little bit more detail. But suffice it to say that they will be fine as a faction. They've got a lot going for them, especially in terms of their armor and their numbers. So yeah, they're not going to be crippled by the loss of this unit by any means. And Gundabad honestly needs them, I think, in a lot of ways. Or maybe just everyone needs a unit that's really able to push. But yeah, you'll see how important they are a little bit later in the battle. But yeah, they don't have their HP anymore, by the way. I don't think they're AP any longer, so that's something to note when using these guys. Now over here we have the Goblin Trackers. Big important note on the Goblin Trackers, they're no longer useless. In fact, most militia tier archer units I find are going to be really, really cost effective, and you're going to bring the higher tier archers a little bit more seldomly, I think, usually for sniping out higher value targets and things like that, or for supporting your lower tier archers, because the higher tier ones generally have much higher range. So you use like your lower tier archers to be like meat shields and stuff like that, and to kind of screen for your higher tier archers, and to punish anybody that goes and tries to focus down your elites, while just providing a whole lot of support. So I really like the new philosophy regarding archers, although they may have a little bit too much damage in my opinion, but we'll see how that changes going a little bit farther into development. But again, more Scourge Raiders, more Witch Realm units. He's also got some Snow Trolls. I think he has some proper Warg Riders around here somewhere. Yeah, I think that's them right there. No, Warg Skirmishers. So a lot of Warg Skirmishers in this force. But that basically does it for the Gundabad armies, I think. So without any further ado, let's get into the replay battle. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Now the battle is going to begin with that thing that Gundabad is most famous for. A headlong, heedless of the casualties rush right into the front of the Elven formation, right into the teeth of all of their skirmishers and their pike lines. The Orc Feller is going to be leading the way. Definitely the least valuable units in this Orcish army. They're just going to go for it, and they're going to suffer quite heavily on the approach, especially against the pike lines. The Orc Fellers have quite low melee defense, and they are very, very lightly armored, so they're just going to get poked to death by these stalwart pike blocks of the Lindon Elves. Now, as the Orcs begin to get closer, the Mithlon Marines are going to start winding up, trying to get as much damage in as possible before they get stuck in. Because, as I mentioned, these guys are a mainline infantry unit. On the front lines is where they are supposed to be, although, in my personal opinion, I would move them back a little bit. But there's only so much time to be had maneuvering when the Orcs are basically rushing at you straight off the bat. And you can see a lot of dead Orcs here all along the front line. Unfortunately, the arrows are not able to stem the entire tide, and the Fellers and the Orc Marauders supporting them are going to be able to get in to the Mithlon Marines. One final javelin volley there into the face of the Fellers as they move in to support their fellows on the front lines. And the Mithlon Marines they're taking pretty significant casualties because they are just being pushed right through. And you can really see the mass here of the low mass of the Lindon Elves starting to play against them. And you can see why you need to support these units with other pikes, or with at least something different, right? So Sin of the Dark Cloud is going to start to move forward with his Mithlon pikemen, get in there, try and leverage the range of those pikemen while the Mithlon Marines are going to be blocking for them and just running a little bit of cover. Now, all along the lines, you can see the Orcs of Gundabad have made it in to the Lindon Elves. I think this is Sin of the Dark Cloud's army over here as well. You can see they're much more mixed in on this end, much better prepared to meet the charge, and that is going to pay some serious dividends. You can see that the Mithlon Marines here have taken some pretty significant casualties on the charge, but now things are beginning to stabilize. Let's get a nice overhead view here of the Gundabad forces as they rush in. You can see them really going ham here. Snow Trolls in the center, or off to the left of the center rather, pushing right through the Mithlon pikemen and the Mithlon Marines. You can really see why you can really see the low mass rather of the Lindon units in action. This is going to be a problem for you when playing Lindon, and a lot of foes are going to try to exploit this. So be aware of that, and make sure that you have enough units on your battle line to start to push them back. So Rules is going to countercharge with a unit of his Warriors of Harlon, get them in there amongst his Lindon pikemen. You can see arrows from the back lines just pouring in here, trying to thin out the hordes of Gundabad. Over here, though, look at this. The Mithlon pikemen, and I think there's some Warriors of Harlondon in there as well, or some Mithlon Marines, have actually started to push back against this tide of Orc. There's this one little, like, white star in the midst of this black sea of Orcish hatred. Orc Marauder is going to try and snuff it out, pushing hard against the Lindon Elves, and they are being driven steadily back towards the support of the Lindon pikemen, and I think some more of the Mithlon pikemen are mixed in there as well. More Snow Trolls moving in, trying to open up another gap in that line. Let's get right down in the action. Yeah, that is pretty ugly for the Lindon Elves. Those Trolls are going to be able to push through there quite easily, but once they get in, they're going to be surrounded by some high damage Elven units, and it's not going to be an easy thing for them to push too much farther. Rules also has a lot of support in the back, a very nice layered defense here from Rules and from the Lindon factions, and they're going to be able to shut down that push. Over here, though, look at this. Orcs coming in like a wrecking ball. They're going to take a lot of casualties doing this, but damn. You can see Rules moving in with some more of his support. Another Phalanx moving in to try and plug that gap in the line. It says the Orcs are winning quite heavily, and the Lindon line seems to be faltering, at least over here on the left. And you can see, I think some of the Blackwatch Legion have now moved in from Carindol, and that's going to be a real big problem. So to counter this, and I think just kind of in preparation for a push from those high armor units, Sin of the Dark Cloud has actually committed his Blade Masters of Loon, who have high enough damage to get through the high armor of those Blackwatch Legion. You can see them just muscling their way in here, just pushing a massive gap in the Lindon line, which the Lindon Elves are really struggling to cover. I've got my Lindon Marines in there, along with I think some of my mainline Spearmen, but over here, my line is held quite well. Actually, no, this is Sin of the Dark Cloud, who's just been pushed through, but you can see that I've got a really stacked defense here. A lot of Warriors of Harlondon and some Mithlon pikemen in there to to kind of take up the swords of their fallen foes as the orcs push farther and farther into the Mythlon formation. And over here, I've had to cover a hole in the right of my line with my Mythlon Marines. They've already tossed their javelin, so they are now out, and they're sticking it to the orcs quite literally. And the Orc Marauders are being steadily driven back by by the valor of these elven spearmen. Now, there's a lot going on in the back here that I kind of missed a little bit, so I apologize for that. Some of my horse archers, my Harlindon wardens, unfortunately got caught out here by a lot of trolls. They managed to kill some of the trolls, but I wasn't able to move them. They kind of bugged out a little bit. So there's actually a lot of cavalry action here that we haven't seen. You can see the chariots here from Sin of the Dark Cloud charging straight on through these halberdiers, which is not the best place for those chariots to be, since the halberdiers do have a small bonus versus cavalry. But I suppose when you're desperate, you got to do what you got to do. Over here, you can see the Mythlon Lancers of Sin of the Dark Cloud. Some of them quite heavily reduced. Now skirting around the flank, looking like they're going to go for the back lines, try and put a little bit of early harass into the Orcish reserves under Fluffy Duck, and it's going to be pretty ugly if they manage to get their charge off. Though they do have to contend with some Warg skirmishers for the time being. So it looks like this smaller unit of Mythlon Lancers are going to just go for it, charge headlong into the Warg skirmishers, get a nice charge there, and actually obliterate 4 or 5 of them pretty well instantly. Now, you don't want to leave these guys in close combat with the Warg skirmishers for too long. They are still anti-armor and anti-cavalry, so you want to just constantly be cycle charging your Lancers in and out of there to try and deal with those beasts. Over here, the Mythlon Lancers getting a nice charge into the Guardians of Karn Doom. Oh, look at that. That is beautiful. Now, it is important to note that these are Lancer Cav. They're supposed to do this kind of damage on the charge. Most cavalry, however, will not if they are not armed with lances. Only Lancer Cavalry has the charge bonus necessary to do what they just did. So don't worry too much about cavalry being super overpowered or anything like that. This is the role that these units are supposed to perform. In close combat, especially against other cavalry, these guys suffer grievously, especially against melee cav. If you get melee cav into Lancers, the melee cav will chew them out very, very quickly. So there are some really obvious and readily available counters to them, so don't worry about that too much. But in any case, Fluffy Duck giving chase to this large blob of Mythlon Lancers. You can see them going for, looks like some of the other reserves here. I think this is under Von Mountain. Sin just trying to commit his cavalry to doing as much damage as possible. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the line over here. Looks like Rules just managed to snipe out one of the evil generals as they pushed farther and farther into the Lindon formation. Look at this. Look at the devastation that the orcs have caused, but now the Lindon elves are beginning to stabilize it, and the orcs have lost thousands upon thousands of their number. Over on this end, you can see that my line is holding very well against even some of the orcish elites. There's some Witch Realm pikemen that are mixed in there, but they are no match for the professional pike blocks of the Lindon elves. This is the kind of fight that Lindon is exceptional at. And you can see the warriors of Harlindon blocking those pike attacks while the pikes in from behind poke at the Witch Realm pikemen. And the Witch Realm pikes just are finding themselves overwhelmed by this combined arms approach. Now over on my my right, I've managed to stabilize with the addition of some of my Mythlon Bladesmen and my Lindon Marines who've pushed back the orcs, and indeed a unit of trolls. So the Lindon elves handling this quite well. There's an overwhelming numbers advantage in favor of the orcs of Gundabad, and the Elves of Lindon, I think, have really managed to make the most out of a difficult situation. Now, in a box area like this, this is normally not the kind of fight that Lindon likes to have. I mean, naturally, they want units to get themselves stuck on their pike block, but they usually, in my experience at least, my limited experience, mind you, but in my experience, they do need a little bit more skirmish time to soften up the enemy. But in any case, moving on to the back lines. See the Mythlon Lancers getting a nice charge here into the Trolls. And now, Trolls are as weak as ever to Lancer or just cavalry charges. And that's because cavalry charges, they tend to one-hit things. It doesn't really seem to matter how much HP they have. And that's just the way that the Medieval 2 engine is. So you're going to want to be careful with your Trolls. It's going to be the same old cat and mouse game that it always was. If you can get your Trolls charging into cavalry, then they will massacre cavalry, as what we saw over here. Now, there's a lot of dead Trolls there, but they also had some support, and these were bow cavalry, so the mountain Trolls who are lower tier Trolls got softened up a little bit. But if your cavalry gets charged by Trolls, your cavalry will die really, really, really fast. But if your cavalry gets to charge off on trolls, then obviously the trolls will die. And there's counterplay to that, right? So honestly, I don't see that as being a big problem. Fluffy Duck now has managed to push the Lindon Lancers out of his back line. I think most of those units are pretty well done for this battle. You can see that the Goblin Archers focusing down on them and killing some of that cav with arrows. So arrows are definitely a viable counter to cavalry in 0.95, especially some of the lightly armored, very quick cavalry like the Midland Lancers, for example. Even the Horse Lords of Lindon don't stand up to arrow fire very well. Looks like Sin of the Dark Cloud just going for it. This is one of the things that I forgot to mention. Check this out. That's the new general model for Lindon. That is Círdan the Shipwright, the man himself, one of the oldest elves in Middle-earth. He's going to be leading the Lindon forces into battle. Those orcs are unfortunately going to catch those Horse Lords of Lindon, and they are going to go down. And that is Sin's general right there. A little bit of a misstep on the part of Sin of the Dark Cloud, and that's going to be pretty well it for the rest of his cavalry. You can see that the Orc Halberdiers from Fluffy Duck are closing in on either end, and this cavalry is going to find itself ultimately trapped. Now, if we look here on the line, the Lindon Elves have managed to break through and push back the Orcs of Gundabad, and that was all going very well. You can see them slowly rolling up the line, but now the Black Watch Legion have arrived. Now, there's still enough forces here, I think, to hold this section of the line down, but the Black Watch Legion, now that this line has thinned out a fair amount, they're going to be able to just muscle their way in there, and that's going to be a real big problem. Over on this end, you can see that the Orcs of Gundabad have exploited the gap in the Lindon phalanx. They're slowly beginning to overwhelm them. Some of my Mithlon pikemen here are finding themselves basically without support, and I think this was a little bit of a miscommunication on the part of myself and my ally. I was hoping that my ally rules would move up here once we had pushed back the Orcs of Gundabad and re-establish our front line, but unfortunately the forces are being held in reserve, I think a little bit too late. So Rules, I think, is using this to his advantage. This is part of a strategy on his end, but yeah, he's using this to get some charges off with his cavalry and things like that, but I personally would have preferred to reestablish our front line with our infantry, and that's exactly what he's in the process of doing now. So I'm going to move up my Mithlon Marines here to support his Mithlon Pikes and his Bladesmen and things like that, and I'm going to charge them right in there and try and entice my ally to move a little bit farther forward. So Rules has now reestablished his front line. The Lindon Elves have the left flank under control, and the Orcs of Gundabad have suffered quite heavily, but yet another wave is moving in under Vaughn Mountain. So many orcs, and there's still a lot of them left. Look at this. Very, very deadly. Over here, a lot of the elites, the Gundabad elites under Fluffy Duck. Some of them quite heavily reduced, I think, by the action of Sin of the Dark Cloud in the back lines. But now that the Lindon cavalry has melted away, the orcs are free to move in with their full might, and indeed they are. And the big, yeah, look at this. Look at the Black Watch Legion have done here. I've had to move in with a lot of my hybrid units. My Lindon Guard, not quite out of ammunition at this point in the game, but they are far enough out. Oh, look at that. That's the new Gundabad's general model, by the way. It's a black Numenorian with those big tusks. Yeah, my Lindon Guard were basically, they'd used enough of their ammunition that I felt comfortable moving them in here. So now I'm going to be able to hopefully stabilize this portion of the line against the Black Watch Legion. But I don't have a lot of killing power left. A lot of my Bladesmen of Lune have been committed already. I think this, the admit defeat there, I believe, is from WK, whose army is basically gone at this point. But yeah, I don't have a ton of killing power left in my army. I've mixed in, I think these are my Wardens of Carabera. No, these are Sins. Mine are going to be joining them shortly. Just trying to get some killing power in there to deal with the Black Watch Legion. You can see them just pushing forward, massacring the very light Lindon Elves, just bullying them out of position. Now, the Black Watch Legion do take a lot of damage in this kind of exchange, but the harm that they do to your lines and to the contiguity of your formations is pretty significant. Yeah, my Lindon Guard being pushed back quite severely. The Rangers of Carabera just not having a good time here either. Black Watch Legion muscling their way through. Now, this is why I say that Lindon usually needs a little bit more skirmish time. If we had time to kind of focus down the Black Watch Legion and with our cavalry, for example, with the Lindon Lancers and things like that, then we would have been doing a lot better. Over here, the same disaster is happening to me yet again. This is Pope Fluffy Duck's Black Watch Legion, who are going to be pushing straight on through. Now, some of those units flying are not necessarily dead. They do get back up again. But the damage has definitely been done in this case to my formation. And a lot of these units being overwhelmed. Oh, that poor That poor warrior of Harlon getting massacred by one of the Guardians of Karn Doom. Now, this is a big problem. So I'm going to move in with some of my cavalry, some of my Horse Lords of Lune. Going to countercharge this push from the Blackwatch Legion. Try and scythe down a few of their numbers. I'm going to come in support with my Lindon archers. And I think the rules is going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to pull my Horse Lords out of there now that we've got some infantry support in to try and surround this overextended unit of Blackwatch Legion. But on this end, we are definitely suffering. We don't have any of our mainline units. We've had to fall back on some of our hybrids and indeed our ranger units. So the Harlon Guard, they're a decent enough holding force, but they don't have the killing power of a phalanx supported by swordsmen. So we're really in a lot of trouble. And you can see that the problem's already beginning to arise with my notoriously fickle right flank now being overwhelmed once again by the works of Gundabad. So I'm going to move in, or this is actually Sin the Dark Club moving in with a unit of Harlon Guard to try and put a cork in this particular gap in our line. Over on this end, though, the left flank, the one that was being pushed back quite heavily for most of the game, is now doing much, much better. Rules has a big phalanx set up here with a lot of killing power. He's got his Mithlon pikemen, Harlon Guard. I think he's also got some blade masters in there as well. Yeah, some Mithlon Bladesmen, a fairly healthy unit of Mithlon Bladesmen in there, so the orcs are not going to be able to push through this very easily. And he's got some range support in the form of his Mithlon chariots. Now we've got cavalry just kind of moving in and out of the right flank, trying to be as helpful as possible when it comes to pushing back the center line, but we are actually being focused down. I think that's why I've got my Horse Lords of Lune in the back, and I've been kind of cycle charging them in and out. Rules is going to go in with his chariots. Let's get right down in there. Look at that. I think that's the end unit sounds that you're hearing right now that are attached to the Mithlon chariots. I don't think that that's going to be final. I think they're probably going to get the cavalry ones. But you can see that just the damage that those Lindon chariots have done. And they have a lot of pushing power, and they pushed hard through their lines and actually managed to kill quite a lot of them. So now what they need to do, if at all possible, is to try and get a nice charge along the axis of this orcish blob here to try and relieve these beleaguered Lindon units. But I don't think they're going to have the opportunity. I think that the chariots are currently being hunted by some of those wargs. And quite a lot of them are going to end up dying. I can't quite find them. I'm not too sure what happened to them. But I believe this is the point in the battle where they end up getting focused down by the wargs. But we have managed to stabilize things a little bit in the center-ish area here. But over where there's still Blackwatch Legion and a large number of Orc Marauders and some Gundabad Guard, I think, are mixed in there as well, we are really having a lot of trouble. Now some Trolls have come in. 7 Trolls of Gundabad from Vaughn Mountain. I think they got hit hard by Sin's Lancers earlier. Now coming to the front lines, looking for a little bit of revenge. And these Harlon Guard are steadily being pushed back. And this is the point where Rules falls back on his Triarii and charges in with his elite units of Rangers. I think that's... He's got a unit of Lancers in there as well, charging hard, hitting the Orcish Halberdiers and the Orcish Marauders in their flank. That's going to be really effective. Now those Orcs are going to push back and get stuck on a few of the Blade Masters of Lune, who are going to be swiftly dealt with by that massive blob of Orcish forces. Now we've got another wave coming in, just unceasing tides of Orcs that have... that wave has broken several times now, but I think now this is going to be the point where they break through and the floodgates are opened once and for all. Over here, the forces of, I think this is mostly Rules' forces, have done a great job at shutting down the Orcs of Gundabad. Look at this. The Elves of Lindon have really made them pay for every inch of ground that they've taken, and Rules has definitely held out longer than the other Elven forces, though now we are being focused down by some of the Goblin Trackers and things like that in the back. At this point in the game, we didn't have any arrow ammunition left. We needed to use it to try and thin out the Orcish lines. So now we're basically at the mercy of these Goblin Trackers. If we had had a little bit more skirmish time, again, if we were able to kind of pick our battles a little bit better, we would have been able to skirmish down some of the more important and ultimately very deadly units, like the Goblin Trackers. And it's weird to find myself saying that, but the Goblin Trackers are deadly. You're not going to bring too many of them as Gundabad, I don't think. You're going to focus, I think, more on like pushing and more on your infantry and maybe on your wargs and trolls and things like that. But as support units, the Goblin Trackers are definitely a force to be feared, especially when you don't have an answer to them. And this is my Horse Lords of Lune being focused down by them. No, never mind. That's the Mithlon Lancers who are taking quite a lot of casualties. Charging back into the halberds. Unfortunately, the orcs were a little bit more ready for them this time. And maybe those Mithlon Lancers are going to find themselves impaled on the ends of those wicked orc halberds. Over on this end, Rules just cycle charging in and out, trying to deal with as many of these orcs as possible. But ultimately, the Lindon forces have been overwhelmed. If we take a little bit of a bird's eye view here, not a lot left from the elves. Very thin units that just don't have the stopping power that the phalanxes and the shield and sword-armed infantry do. So we got some Horse Lords of Loon and some Mithlon Lancers going for one final glorious charge here against the wargs, against the trolls of Gundabad, as the rest of the Mithlon army begins to melt away. Wardens of Carib Aaron fighting to their last. Now these guys are very unlikely to rout. I want to say a quick little note here on morale in 0.95. Things will rout quite often, except for the really high tier elite units like these guys. What do we got here? Rules going for one final glorious charge with his Mithlon Lancers. I think this is going to be the end of them. Coming in support of their brothers on the ground, the Wardens of Carib Aaron. Mithlon Lancers here are going to give their last. Now, I think I've actually got a unit of Horse Lords as well. Yeah, these Warg Skirmishers taking on Círdan and his bodyguard. They're going to retreat after taking some pretty significant losses. Only 5 of them left, and this is it. This is basically the last of the Elven army. I think there's like a small pocket over here of the Elves of Lindon. Small line of Harlindon Guard. There goes Rules' general, I believe. And that's going to leave my general as the last one still on the field. Realizing that the day has been lost, the Horse Lords of Loon are going to gather around their general, Círdan, who has fought the orcs for thousands upon thousands of years since the First Age. He's going to rally his horsemen together for one final glorious charge into the orcs of Gundabad. I think their target is going to be the trolls of Gundabad, going to try and kill the biggest, meanest looking monster on the field. Looks like Fluffy Dog was trying to block a little bit with his halberds, but those halberds are going to get just brutalized by the Horse Lords of Loon. Unfortunately, Warg Skirmishers coming in from the rear, going to take down Círdan's bodyguard until he is fighting alone, on his own, amidst a sea of foes. He's cutting down halberds left and right. Troll comes in from behind, a lot of damage being done there. And these anti-cavalry units are going to ultimately be the end of Círdan the Shipwright. And that is going to be it for our exposition battle here. Pardon me, between the Lindon Elves and the Orcs of Gundabad. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know that there are a lot of people out there that have concerns that the Elves will not be strong. Now, the Lindon Elves, they are not a powerhouse. Not like up front. You have to do a lot with them in order to win, and that's pretty consistent with the philosophy that I think the dev team is taking with the Elves moving forward. There's a lot that you need to do in order to be successful with the Elves, but when you actually accomplish that, it feels like a satisfying victory. You feel like you've accomplished something. Now, that being said, look at the damage that these Elves did. If you're thinking that the Elves of Lindon are going to be weak, you've seen an example today of just the amount of killing power that those supported pike lines can do. And as I mentioned a few times in the video, this is not necessarily the ideal engagement for them, and Gundabad has some pretty nice counters to their battle line in the form of the Trolls and the Blackwatch Legion. I think if the Blackwatch Legion were either killed early or in fewer numbers, or they didn't have them at all, this would have been a wash. The Orcs of Gundabad would have been massacred. They never would have managed to push through the lines that the way that they did. So bear in mind that the Elves are going to be strong, but there's a lot of counters in this. But there's counterplay to those counters. So, for example, javelins and things like that, focusing down the Blackwatch Legion, would have massacred them because they only have a single HP. So all it takes is one javelin getting through the armor and the shield, and boom, one of those models is going to fall. And javelins are pretty efficient in this. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this so far. I know I am excited to play with Lindon. You're gonna be seeing some more battles with them in the future. I'm gonna do my best to get some testing battles in, and to play with some of the other testers, and maybe do some scenarios once the patch is released. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Coming up next, I have a replay sent in to me is very similar to this one. It's like a kind of a classic line battle, a lot of pushing, a lot of shoving between Gondor, Arnor, and Mordor. It's kind of like a Daggerlord battle. Actually, the High Elves are in it as well, so it's like a sort of semi-historical version of the Battle of the Daggerlord. So that's pretty exciting. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this little preview, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye!